Long before Scotland became a land of postcards, castles, and romantic legends, it was a place people feared, not because of monsters, not because of magic, but because life itself was unforgiving. In the Middle Ages, Scotland sat at the very edge of the known European world. To the south was England, richer, stronger, and always watching. To the north and west, only cold seas, endless storms, and darkness. This was not a gentle land, and it did not raise gentle people. Imagine waking up every morning unsure if you would survive the day. Not because of war, not because of crime, but because of the cold, the hunger, and the land itself. This was medieval Scotland, a place where survival mattered more than happiness, where family loyalty could save your life or end it, and where nature was the first and most dangerous enemy. Scotland's landscape shaped everything. Towering mountains cut villages off from one another. Deep forests swallowed travelers whole. Boglands trapped animals, carts, and sometimes people. Roads were rare. Paths were unreliable. Many villages lived as if the rest of the world did not exist. And in a way, it didn't. Messages took weeks to travel short distances. Help almost never arrived in time. If something went wrong, you handled it yourself, or you died. The weather ruled all. Rain fell constantly. Winds howled without warning. And winters seemed to stretch forever. Even in summer, warmth was never guaranteed. A sudden frost could destroy an entire harvest overnight. One storm could starve a whole region. In medieval Scotland, the land did not forgive mistakes. Most people lived in small settlements made of stone, wood, and mud. Houses were dark, damp, and cold. There were no glass windows, only holes covered with animal hide or cloth. Smoke from the fire filled the room, burning the eyes and lungs. Animals often shared the same space as humans, not for comfort, but for warmth. The smell was constant. The floor was dirt. Disease spread easily. This was normal life. There was no such thing as privacy. No silence. No escape from hardship. People slept when it was dark. They woke with the sun. And every day followed the same question. How do we survive today? Food was never secure. Most Scottish families depended on small crops of oats and barley. Wheat, common in southern Europe, barely grew in the harsh climate. Meals were simple. Thin porridge. Hard bread. Occasionally salted meat, if the family was lucky. Fresh food was rare in winter. Very rare. If a harvest failed, there was no backup. No government aid. No emergency supply. People starved. Slowly. Quietly. Entire villages could weaken over months. Unable to work, unable to hunt, unable to fight disease. Hunger was not dramatic. It was patient. Life expectancy was painfully short. Many children never reached adulthood. Disease, cold, and malnutrition took them early. Those who survived childhood often faced injury, infection, or violence later in life. A simple cut could turn fatal. A fever could burn through a household. There were no doctors as we know them today. Only folk remedies, prayers, and hope. People learned to accept death as a constant companion. It slept beside them, worked beside them, and followed them everywhere. Yet despite all this, people stayed. Why? because this was home, because their families had lived on this land for generations, because leaving was often more dangerous than staying. And because in Scotland, family meant everything. Society was built around clans, large extended families bound by blood, land, and loyalty. Your clan protected you, fed you, fought for you, but it also demanded absolute obedience. If your clan had an enemy, that enemy became yours. Even if the conflict began long before you were born, feuds lasted decades, sometimes centuries. A single insult could lead to bloodshed. A stolen cow could start a war. Violence was not chaos. It was tradition. And everyone understood the rules. There was no strong central law to stop this. The king's power faded the farther north you traveled. In remote areas, clans ruled themselves. Justice was personal. Punishment was swift. Mercy was rare. If someone killed a member of your family, you were expected to respond. Not someday, but immediately. Failing to do so meant weakness, and weakness was dangerous. Even nobles lived hard lives. Castles were not warm palaces. They were cold stone fortresses. Thick walls kept enemies out, but trapped cold inside. Fires burned constantly, yet rooms remained freezing. Hygiene was poor. Disease spread easily. Even lords and ladies faced hunger during sieges or harsh winters. Power did not guarantee comfort. Only survival. Above all of this stood the church. Religion shaped every part of life. People believed God controlled the weather, the harvest, disease. War. A good year meant divine favor. A bad year meant punishment. Fear of hell was stronger than fear of death. People prayed constantly, confessed often, and obeyed the church's authority. Faith was comfort, but it was also control. Scotland was not isolated by choice, that it was isolated by nature. Mountains, seas, weather. And yet, danger still came from the south. England watched Scotland closely, and often, aggressively. Raids, invasions, political pressure. War was never far away. Scottish villages could be peaceful. One day, burned the next. Men were taken to fight. Women were left behind to protect children and land. Loss was expected. Grief was familiar. This was the world medieval Scots were born into. A world without softness, without safety nets, without guarantees. Every generation learned the same lesson early. Life here does not care about you. You endure, or you disappear. And yet, from this harshness came something powerful: resilience, loyalty, and a fierce sense of identity. Scotland did not break its people. It hardened them. As you listen to this story, remember, this is not a tale of heroes in shining armor. It is a story of ordinary people facing extraordinary hardship. People who woke each day not dreaming of greatness, but hoping simply to survive the night. And this is only the beginning. In medieval Scotland, life did not begin gently. There were no warm rooms, no doctors waiting nearby, no soft blankets prepared in advance. Most children were born in dark homes made of stone and wood, with the sound of wind pressing against the walls. Birth was dangerous for the mother and for the child. Many women gave birth without help beyond older family members. There were no trained midwives in most villages. Only experience passed down through generations. If something went wrong, there was little anyone could do. Some babies never took their first breath. Others survived only a few days. Loss was common. Grief was quiet, and life moved on. For those who survived infancy, the world offered no pause. There was no time to recover, no time to rest. From the moment a child could walk, they became part of the household labor, not because parents were cruel, but because survival demanded it. Children carried water from distant streams. They gathered firewood in freezing rain. They watched animals and guarded small crops. Even the smallest hands were useful. In medieval Scotland, childhood was brief. Clothing offered little protection. Most children wore the same rough wool garments year after year. Clothes were patched, repaired, and reused until they fell apart. Shoes were rare. Bare feet walked on cold stone and frozen earth. During winter, fingers went numb. Toes cracked and bled. The cold was not an inconvenience. It was a constant threat. Hunger followed, closely behind. Children ate the same food as adults, because there was no separate meal for the young. Thin porridge, hard bread, occasionally a bit of salted fish or meat. Fresh fruit was rare. Vegetables were limited. When food ran low, children ate less. Not because they needed it less, but because adults needed strength to work. Many children grew slowly. Some never grew strong at all. Education, as we know it today, barely existed. Only the children of nobles or church families learned to read. Most others learned through observation. They learned how to work, how to obey, and how to endure pain without complaint. Mistakes were costly. A child who failed to watch livestock could lose the family's only source of food. A child who wandered too far might never return. The land was unforgiving. Play existed, but it was rare and simple. Children carved toys from wood. They played with stones, bones, and sticks. Laughter came in short moments, quick and easily forgotten. There was no expectation of joy. Only usefulness. Winter was the great test. Every year, families feared it. Days grew shorter. Fires burned constantly, but never enough. Children slept close together for warmth. Sometimes with animals nearby. Coughs echoed in the night. Fever spread easily. Many children did not survive winter. Their names were remembered quietly, if at all. Disease showed no mercy. There were no vaccines, no antibiotics. Simple illnesses became deadly. A sore throat could lead to infection. A small wound could turn black and swollen. Parents did what they could. Herbs, prayers, and hope. Often, it was not enough. Religion shaped how families understood loss. When a child died, people said it was God's will. Questioning it meant questioning faith itself. Grief had limits. Life demanded strength. As children grew older, expectations increased. Boys learned to fight early. Not formally, but through necessity. They practiced with wooden weapons. They watched older men settle. Disputes with steel. Violence was not shocking. It was instruction. Girls were taught endurance. They learned how to cook over open fires, how to preserve food, how to care for younger. Siblings. Marriage often came early, sometimes before a girl fully understood what it meant. There was no freedom to choose a future. Fate was inherited. A farmer's child became a farmer. A warrior's child learned to fight. Change was rare. Escape was nearly impossible. Yet within this harshness, something formed. Children became strong, not in comfort, but in resilience. They learned to read the weather, to sense danger, to endure hunger without complaint. Fear did not disappear. It hardened. Family bonds grew deep. Siblings depended on one another. Parents relied on their children. Loss was frequent, but love remained quiet and strong, not spoken often, but proven through survival. For many children, adulthood came early. By their early teens, they carried adult responsibilities. They worked full days. They protected land and livestock. They prepared for conflict. Life moved fast. And slowly at the same time. Those who survived childhood in medieval Scotland carried its lessons forever. They learned that comfort was temporary, that safety was fragile, and that strength mattered more than hope. This was not a land that nurtured innocence. It tested it. And those who lived through it became the hardened men and women who would shape Scotland's history. In the next chapter, we will step deeper into the cold. We will face the winters that broke families, emptied villages, and turned survival into a daily battle. Because in medieval Scotland, winter was not a season. It was an enemy. In medieval Scotland, winter was not just a season. It was something people feared. Long before the first snow fell, families felt it coming. The air grew sharper, the nights grew longer, and the land began to shut down. For months at a time, the cold ruled everything. Winter decided who lived and who did not. There were no forecasts, no warnings. People watched the sky. They felt the wind. They listened to the animals. And when winter arrived early, panic followed quietly behind. Fields froze. Crops failed. Paths disappeared under snow and ice. Once winter settled in, leaving home became dangerous. Sometimes impossible. Homes offered little protection. Stone walls held moisture. Wooden roofs leaked. Fireplaces burned day and night, yet warmth never stayed. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. Eyes burned. Lungs weakened. Children coughed through the night. Elders grew quieter with each passing day. Cold did not kill quickly. It wore people down. Food became the greatest concern. Families counted what remained. Barrels of oats, bits of dried meat, whatever could survive the cold. Fresh food was gone. Hunting was dangerous. Animals hid or migrated. Fishing boats stayed on shore. Every meal mattered. Portions grew smaller. Hunger became normal. The weakest suffered first. Children, the elderly, the sick. A child who seemed healthy in autumn could fade by mid-winter. There was no medicine to help them. Only warmth, and warmth was scarce. Winter also brought isolation. Villages cut off from one another. No visitors. No news. If disease arrived, it stayed. Families cared for the sick in silence, praying the illness would not spread. Often it did. Burials became difficult. Frozen ground resisted shovels. Sometimes bodies waited days to be buried. Death lost its ceremony. Survival took priority. The darkness weighed heavily. In winter, daylight lasted only a few hours. Most of life happened in shadows. People slept longer, spoke less, thought too much. Fear grew in quiet spaces. Stories filled the night. Tales of spirits, of curses, of creatures moving through the snow. People believed winter weakened the barrier between the living and the unseen. Religion offered comfort and an explanation. If winter was harsh, God was testing them. If many died, God was judging them. Faith helped people endure, but it also deepened fear. Animals were brought indoors when possible. Cows, sheep, goats. Not for comfort, but for survival. Their body heat warmed homes slightly. Their presence meant food might return in spring. Losing livestock in winter was often a death sentence for the family. Clothing offered limited help. Wool soaked easily. Once wet, it froze. Many people slept fully dressed, wrapped in whatever fabric they owned. Children shared blankets, sometimes 3 or 4 together. Still, the cold found its way in the coldest winters. Villages disappeared, not abandoned, but erased. Families weakened. Fields left untouched. Homes empty. When spring arrived, some places never recovered. Winter also changed behavior. Arguments increased. Patience thinned. Hunger sharpened tempers. Disputes over food, firewood, or shelter could turn violent. Clans watched each other closely. Scarcity bred suspicion. Raids became more common. Desperate groups attacked neighboring villages, seeking food or animals. Winter did not stop violence. It encouraged it. For children, winter left deep marks. Those who survived remembered it forever. The cold nights, the hunger pains, the silence after someone stopped breathing. Winter taught them something early. Life is fragile. And yet, people endured. They always had. They waited for light, for warmth, for the land to soften again. Hope did not disappear. It simply went quiet. When spring finally came, it felt unreal. Snow melted slowly. Ice cracked. Fields showed signs of life. People stepped outside, blinking in the sunlight. They counted who remained and who was gone. Winter shaped Scotland more than any king. It hardened its people, taught them patience, and reminded them never to feel safe. Even in peace, even in good years. Winter would return. It always did. In the next chapter, we will step away from the cold and into something just as deadly. Hunger. Because in medieval Scotland, starvation did not arrive suddenly. It crept in slowly and stayed. In medieval Scotland, hunger was never far away. It did not arrive suddenly. It did not announce itself. It moved quietly, slowly, patiently. And once it arrived, it stayed. Most families lived just one bad season away from starvation. One failed harvest. One early frost. One summer of endless rain. That was all it took. There were no food reserves. No emergency supplies. No help from distant rulers. When food was gone, people endured. Until they could not. The Scottish land was difficult to farm. The soil was thin. The weather unpredictable. And much of the land was rocky or marshy. Crops struggled to grow. Oats and barley were the most common. Hardy plants. Simple food. Wheat, common in southern lands, rarely survived here. This meant meals were repetitive. And limited. Most days began with porridge. Thin, watery, sometimes barely warm. Bread, when available, was dense and dark, hard enough to break teeth. Meat was rare. Animals were valuable alive. For milk, labor, or breeding. Killing livestock for food was a last resort, because once an animal was gone, it was gone forever. When harvests were good, families stored what they could. Grain was kept in wooden barrels. Meat was salted or smoked, but storage was imperfect. Moisture spoiled grain. Rats and insects stole food. By winter, much was already lost. When food began to run low, people noticed the signs. Meals became smaller. Water was added to stretch porridge further. Children were told they were not hungry. Adults skipped meals quietly. No one complained. Complaining did not create food. Hunger changed the body. People grew thinner, weaker, hands shook. Voices softened. Work became harder. Fields were left unfinished. Repairs delayed. Hunger slowed everything. It also changed the mind. People became cautious, suspicious. Sharing food became dangerous. Kindness had limits when survival was at stake. Children felt hunger differently. Their bodies needed more, but they received less. Many grew slowly. Some never reached full strength. Hunger left marks that lasted a lifetime. Famine was hunger's final form. When entire regions failed to produce enough food, there was nowhere to turn. Villages weakened together. People searched forests for roots and berries. They ate plants meant for animals. They ground bark into meal. Anything to quiet the pain. Animals were slaughtered early, not because families wanted to eat, but because they feared the animals would starve anyway. This offered temporary relief, but it destroyed the future. Without animals, there was no recovery. During famine years, death came slowly, not in waves, but in silence. People faded. They lay down and did not rise. Bodies became light, breathing shallow. There was no strength left to fight illness. Disease followed. Famine closely. Hunger weakened the immune system. Simple infections turned deadly. Villages already struggling lost even more people. Sometimes, half a community disappeared within a year. Travel offered little hope. Other villages were suffering. Roads were dangerous. Bandits knew hunger made people desperate. Travelers risked everything for the chance of food. Many never returned. The church offered prayer, not bread. Priests urged faith, patience, repentance. Hunger was often described as punishment for sin, for pride, for disobedience. People listened because believing there was a reason was easier than accepting there was none. During famine, social order weakened. Old rules mattered less. Stealing increased. So did punishment. A loaf of bread could cost a life. Justice became harsh. Survival demanded control. Parents faced impossible choices. Feed one child more than another. Sell belongings for food. Send children away in hope they might survive elsewhere. Some children were never seen again. Memory of famine stayed long after it ended. People remembered which neighbors helped, and which did not. Trust changed. Relationships hardened. Hunger taught people never to rely on abundance, because abundance never lasted. Even nobles were not immune. Lords relied on peasant labor for food. When peasants starved, so did the estates. Castles could store more, but not forever. During long famines, even the wealthy rationed. Power did not create food. Hunger shaped Scotland's culture deeply. Waste was unthinkable. Excess was suspicious. People valued endurance more than comfort. Eating well was rare. Eating enough was the goal. When famine finally ended, it did not feel like victory. It felt like exhaustion. People returned to the fields slowly. Bodies weakened. Numbers reduced. Life resumed, but changed. Hunger never truly disappeared. It waited. In the soil, in the weather, in the distance between villages. People lived knowing it could return at any time. That knowledge shaped how they planned, how they saved, how they feared. In medieval Scotland, hunger was not an event, but it was a condition, a shadow that followed every meal, a reminder that survival depended on forces no one could control. In the next chapter, we will turn from hunger to violence, from empty bowls to bloodshed, because when food was scarce and fear was high, conflict between families, between clans, became inevitable. In medieval Scotland, survival did not belong to individuals. It belonged to families. And more than that, it belonged to clans. A clan was more than a name, more than shared blood. It was protection, identity, an obligation. To belong to a clan meant you were never truly alone, but it also meant you were never truly free. The land was harsh. The law was distant. So people turned to each other. Families joined together for strength. Brothers, cousins, and distant relatives formed powerful networks of loyalty. This was how order existed, not through kings, not through courts. But through blood. From birth, every person knew where they belonged. Your clan decided your allies, your enemies, and often your future. You did not choose loyalty. It was inherited. Feuds were a natural result. Land was scarce. Food was limited. Boundaries were unclear. One disputed pasture, one stolen animal, one insult spoken in anger. That was enough. A feud could begin quietly, a fight between two men, a wound left untreated, a death that demanded response. In Scotland, a death rarely ended a conflict. It started one. If a member of your clan was killed, justice was expected. Not someday. Immediately. Failure to respond meant weakness, and weakness invited destruction. Revenge was not emotional. It was practical. It sent a message. We will not be touched. Children grew up surrounded by stories of old feuds. Names were remembered. Wrongs were repeated. A boy might hate a man he had never met, because his father did, and his grandfather before him. Violence followed patterns. Raids happened at night. Animals were taken. Houses burned. Direct battles were rare. Ambush was safer. Feuds did not pause for hunger or winter. In fact, scarcity made them worse. When food was short, raids increased. Stealing from enemies felt justified. They would have done the same. Weapons were simple, but Deadly. Knives, axes, short swords. Most men carried something. Sharp. Not for war, but for daily life. And daily. Danger. Women were not spared from. Fuse. They lost husbands, sons, brothers. They carried grief quietly while maintaining the household. Sometimes, women encouraged revenge. Not from cruelty, but from survival. A clan that did not respond would be destroyed. Children learned early. They watched. They listened. They understood who to avoid, who to fear, and who to hate. There was no neutral ground. Every person belonged somewhere. And belonging came with responsibility. Kings attempted to control. Feuds. They issued laws, threatened punishment, but enforcement was weak. The farther north one traveled, the less the king mattered. Clans ruled themselves. Peace was fragile. Sometimes, marriages were arranged to end feuds. A daughter given to an enemy clan, not as love, but as insurance. Even then, peace rarely lasted. Old wounds reopened easily. Feuds shaped. Scottish character. Honor mattered more than life. Loyalty outweighed reason. Forgiveness was rare. And memory was long. Feuds also created stability. Within the clan, people protected one another fiercely. Food was shared. Shelter offered. No one survived alone. Betrayal was the greatest. Crime. Worse than murder. A traitor endangered everyone. Punishment was severe. And public. Stories of clan violence traveled far. They frightened outsiders. They discouraged invasion, at least temporarily. A people willing to fight endlessly were difficult to conquer. Yet feuds came at a cost. Endless bloodshed. Broken families. Lost generations. Some clans weakened themselves fighting old enemies. Others vanished completely. For ordinary people, feuds were a fact of life. They did not question them. They adapted. They prepared. They waited. A man might farm during the day and guard his home at night. A woman might cook meals while listening for footsteps outside. Children slept lightly. Danger was normal. Clan loyalty shaped identity. It decided who you trusted, who you feared, and who you would die for. In medieval Scotland, blood was thicker than law, thicker than faith, thicker than peace. In the next chapter, we will turn our focus to violence itself. To a world where law was weak, punishment was brutal, and justice was often delivered at the edge of a blade. Because in Scotland, when order failed, violence spoke. In medieval Scotland, law was a fragile idea. It existed on parchment, in royal words, in distant castles. But for most people, law lived far away. What mattered was what you could defend, and who would defend you. Kings ruled in name. Their power faded with distance. In the Highlands, on the islands, and in remote valleys, the king's voice rarely reached. There were no police, no standing courts. Justice arrived late. If it arrived at all. When disputes happened, people handled them themselves. Arguments over land, over animals, over honor. Small conflicts escalated quickly because there was no trusted authority to stop them. Violence became a language, a way to speak clearly, a way to warn others, and a way to survive. Most men carried weapons not as soldiers, but as farmers, herders, travelers, a knife at the belt, an axe on the shoulder. These were tools, and weapons second. Fights were common. They broke out over insults, over misunderstandings, over nothing at all. Alcohol played its part. Ale and spirits eased hunger but loosened. Restraint. Words turned sharp. Blades followed. Punishment was harsh, not because people were cruel, but because fear maintained order. Thief might lose a hand. A traitor might lose his life. Public punishment served a purpose. It warned others. There was little room for mercy. A weak response encouraged more violence. Strength kept peace, at least temporarily. Villages often took justice into their own hands. If someone threatened the community, they were removed, sometimes quietly, sometimes publicly. Bodies disappeared. Stories spread. Travel was dangerous. Roads were few and poorly maintained. Forests hid ambush. Bandits waited where law was weakest. Merchants traveled in groups. Even then, risk remained. Violence followed hunger. When food was scarce, desperation grew. People stole. People killed. Survival erased. Morality. Women were vulnerable. Law offered them little protection. Assault often went unpunished. Family. Revenge was the only defense. Children witnessed violence. Early. They learned what fear looked like, what blood smelled like. What silence followed a killing. Religion tried to restrain brutality. The church preached peace. Forgiveness. But even priests knew their limits. Faith did not stop hunger or fear. Executions were public. Not hidden. Crowds gathered. Children watched. Violence became familiar. Yet violence was not chaos. It followed rules, clan boundaries, honor codes, unspoken laws. Breaking these rules invited destruction. The absence of formal law created a different kind of order, one based on reputation. Man known to retaliate was often left alone. A weak man was targeted. Fear replaced justice. And it worked until it didn't. English invasions made lawlessness worse. War weakened control. Soldiers looted. Villages burned. Violence multiplied. For ordinary people, peace was temporary, a pause between dangers. Despite this, communities survived. They adapted. They watched. They remembered. Violence shaped behavior. People spoke carefully. They avoided strangers. They trusted slowly. In medieval Scotland, lawlessness was not rebellion. It was necessity, a response to isolation, harsh land, and constant threat. In the next chapter, we will step into a world where faith and fear intertwined, where the church offered comfort and control, because in a violent land, belief became a powerful force. In medieval Scotland, faith was everywhere. It filled the silence. It shaped every decision. And it explained what no one else could. When life was harsh, faith gave meaning. When death was close, faith offered comfort. But faith also brought fear. The church stood at the center of daily life, not just as a place of worship, but as the strongest authority most people knew. kings ruled land. Clans ruled families, but the church ruled the soul. Most villages had a small stone church, cold, dark, quiet. People gathered there not just on holy days, but whenever fear grew too heavy, prayer became a habit, a reflex. Religion offered answers in a world full of uncertainty. Why did crops fail? Why did children die? Why did winter return so cruelly? The answer was almost always the same: God's will. This belief brought peace. It told people their suffering had meaning, but it also brought guilt. If life was hard, perhaps they had sinned. Perhaps they were being punished. Fear of hell was stronger than fear of death. Hell was described in vivid detail: fire, darkness, endless pain. People listened closely. They behaved carefully. The church controlled morality. What was right? What was wrong? Breaking church rules meant more than social shame. It meant eternal punishment. Priests held enormous power. They were among the few who could read, who understood Latin scripture. Their words were rarely questioned. Why would they be? They spoke for God. Church rituals structured life: baptism at birth, marriage in adulthood, last rites before death. Faith followed people from cradle to grave. When disease spread, people prayed harder. When famine struck, they fasted and confessed. Faith became both shield and burden. The church also controlled time. Holy days marked the calendar. Work paused. Life slowed. These moments brought relief, a brief escape from survival. But the church also enforced fear. Sin was everywhere. Thoughts could be sinful. Desires could be sinful. Fear lived inside people. Quietly. Superstition blended with faith. Old beliefs never disappeared. Spirits in the forest. Curses on the land. People believed the world was full of unseen forces. Winter nights felt longer because of it. Witches became a threat, especially women who lived alone, or spoke too freely, or knew herbal remedies. Fear needed a target, and sometimes the church pointed the way. Confession was constant. People admitted thoughts they had never acted on. Guilt was shared. Absolution granted. This cycle kept order. Church punishment was powerful. Excommunication meant isolation. No one would help you. No one would speak to you. In a clan-based society, this was a living death. Despite its power, the church was not always kind. Priests demanded tithes even during famine. Food that could have saved lives was given to the church. People obeyed. Fear made them obedient. Yet the church also helped. It fed the poor when it could, sheltered travelers, cared for the sick. Faith was not only control. It was comfort. People needed something to believe in. The land was cruel. Life was uncertain. Faith gave structure. Meaning. Hope. Children learned religion early. They memorized prayers, listened to sermons. Fear shaped obedience. Even warriors feared God. Before battle, they prayed. After killing, they confessed. Violence and faith lived side by side. The church shaped how people understood justice. Forgiveness was preached, but revenge was practiced. This contradiction was accepted. Life was complicated. In times of peace. Faith felt gentle. In times of crisis, it became intense. Fear deepened belief. As centuries passed, the church's influence only grew, but so did tension. between faith and hunger, between belief and reality. In medieval Scotland, faith was survival. It calmed the mind. It disciplined behavior. It explained suffering. But it also reminded people they were never truly free. Even alone in the dark, God was watching. In the next chapter, we will step into a quieter space. Inside the cold stone walls of castles, we will explore the lives of nobles and lords. And discover the power did not bring comfort, only different burdens. Castles are often imagined as places of comfort. Warm halls, soft beds, feasts by candlelight. In medieval Scotland, this image was far from reality. Castles were built for defense, not for living well. Most Scottish castles were cold stone fortresses. Thick walls protected against attack, but they trapped cold inside. Even in summer, many rooms felt damp and dark. In winter, the cold settled into the stone and never left. Fireplaces burned constantly, yet warmth rarely traveled far. Only those standing closest to the fire felt any real heat. Smoke filled the halls, stinging eyes and lungs. There were no chimneys as we know them today. Breathing inside a castle was often uncomfortable. Castles smelled unpleasant. Waste disposal was poured out. Human waste was dumped outside. Walls or into pits. Animals lived nearby. Rotting food, wet stone, smoke. These smells never fully faded. Water was precious. Wells were often deep within the castle. During sieges, water became more valuable than food. If a well was poisoned or destroyed, the castle was doomed. Life inside a castle followed strict routines. The Lord ruled everything within the walls. Servants rose before dawn. They cleaned halls, prepared meals, tended animals. Nobles oversaw land and defense. Everyone had a role. Privacy did not exist. Large. All served many purposes. Sleeping, eating, meetings. Beds were simple wooden frames with straw mattresses. Fleas and lice were common. Food inside castles was not always plentiful. During peace, nobles ate better than peasants. Meat, bread, ale. But during war or winter, even castles rationed. Supplies ran out quickly. Feasts were rare. They marked important events, weddings, alliances, victories. For most days, meals were modest. Hygiene was basic. Bathing was infrequent. Cold water discouraged. Cleanliness. Disease spread easily. Even nobles fell ill. Castles were centers of power, but power brought danger. They were targets. Enemies sought to capture or destroy them. Sieges were common. When surrounded, life became desperate. Food was rationed. Animals slaughtered. Time worked against the defenders. During long sieges, hunger returned. Just like in villages. Status offered no protection. The psychological toll was heavy. Isolation, fear, waiting. Every sound raised alarm. Women in castles lived restricted lives. They managed households, raised children, arranged alliances. Their freedom was limited. Marriages were political. Love was optional. Children of nobles learned early. They trained for leadership or marriage. Education was better than in villages, but pressure was constant. Failure had consequences. Castles were symbols. Of authority, of resistance. They reminded people who held power. Yet castles were never truly safe. Fire could breach walls. Betrayal could open gates. Disease could kill from within. For common people, castles represented both protection and oppression. They offered refuge during raids, but demanded loyalty and labor. Despite hardship, castles stood for centuries, built by hands hardened by cold and hunger. They survived because people endured. Life inside medieval Scottish castles was not luxurious. It was controlled, cold, and dangerous. Power did not soften life, that it only changed its shape. In the next chapter, we will step outside the walls, into open conflict with England, into wars that shaped Scotland's identity forever, because no place, not even a castle, was safe from invasion. For medieval Scotland, war was never distant. It did not happen far away, on unknown battlefields. It arrived at village doors, in fields, at castle gates, and most often it came from the south. England was stronger, richer, more organized. And always watching. Scotland and England shared a border, but not peace. Centuries of conflict shaped their relationship. Disputes over land, over crowns, over control. War was not an event. It was a condition. English armies crossed into Scotland regularly. Sometimes with banners and armor, sometimes quietly in raids. Villages burned, crops destroyed, not always to conquer, but to weaken. The goal was simple: starve the land, break resistance. The hungry people could not fight. Scottish soldiers were rarely professional. They were farmers, herders, clan warriors, men who fought when needed and returned to their fields when they could. Training was uneven, equipment limited, but motivation was strong. Defending Scotland meant defending home. Land was identity. Losing it meant losing everything. English invasions created constant fear. No village felt safe. No road was secure. People learned to watch the horizon. Castles became key targets. English forces surrounded them, cut off supplies. Waited. Time favored the attacker. Sieges were brutal. Food ran out. Water dwindled. Disease spread. Defenders weakened. Sometimes surrender came quietly. Sometimes not at all. For civilians, war was destruction. Men were taken or killed. Women and children fled. Homes abandoned. Life disrupted. Refugees crowded into safer regions. Resources stretched thin. Hunger followed war closely. War reshaped society. Young men died. Labor disappeared. Fields lay empty. Recovery took years. Some Scots fought back with guerrilla tactics, ambush, night raids. Knowledge of the land became a weapon. These methods slowed English advances, but did not end conflict. War also deepened clan divisions. Some clans allied with England, others resisted fiercely. Old feuds mixed with new loyalties. Trust became rare, betrayal common. Survival demanded difficult choices. The English presence changed daily life. Laws imposed. Taxes demanded. Resistance punished harshly. People lived under constant tension, never knowing when war would return. Stories of heroism spread. Not polished legends, but grim survival tales. Men who fought in mud, in cold rain. Without glory. Victory was never final. Even after battles ended, Raids continued. Peace was temporary. Children grew up, knowing war. They played among ruins, listened to stories of invasion, prepared for futures shaped by conflict. The land itself showed scars, burned fields, destroyed villages, empty spaces where communities once lived. War hardened Scotland. It strengthened identity. Resistance became tradition. Yet the cost was enormous. Generations lost. Suffering repeated. In medieval Scotland, war with England was not a chapter. There was a backdrop. Always present, always threatening. In medieval Scotland, death was never far away. It did not arrive suddenly. It did not always come with warning. Often, it came quietly. Through sickness, through a small wound, through weakness brought on by hunger or cold. Life was fragile, and everyone knew it. There were no hospitals as we know them. Today. No trained doctors in most villages. No medicine that could truly heal infection. When illness came, people relied on tradition. Herbs gathered from forests, poultices made from plants and animal fat, prayers whispered in the dark. Sometimes these remedies helped. Often they did not. Common illnesses were everywhere. Fever, coughs, skin infections. What might seem minor today could become deadly within days. A simple cold weakened the body. A fever drained strength. Without food or warmth, the body could not recover. Infections were especially dangerous. A small cut from a farming tool, a scratch from an animal, a wound from a fight. If it became infected, there was little hope. Redness spread. Swelling followed. Pain grew. And then silence. Blood poisoning was poorly understood. People believed illness came from bad air, from curses, or from God's punishment. They did not know about bacteria. They only knew that wounds killed. Surgery existed, but it was crude. Amputations were performed to stop infection from spreading, without anesthesia, without sterilized tools. Many patients did not survive the procedure. Those who did lived with permanent disability. Childbirth was one of the greatest dangers. Women faced death each time they gave birth. There were no clean environments, no pain relief, no emergency intervention. Many women died young, leaving children without mothers. Infant mortality was high. Many babies did not survive their first year. Illness, cold, malnutrition. Loss became normal. Grief became quiet. Disease spread quickly. In close quarters, homes were crowded. Animals lived nearby. Hygiene was limited. Clean water was not always available. When sickness entered a household, it often stayed. Epidemics struck without warning. Fevers swept through villages. Skin diseases spread. Sometimes entire communities weakened together. There was no escape. The Black Death reached Scotland later than other parts of Europe, but when it arrived, it devastated the population. People did not understand what was happening. They watched neighbors collapse. Families vanished. Fear spread faster than the disease. Burials became frequent. Graves filled. Quickly. Sometimes bodies were buried in shared pits. There was no time for ceremony. Survival demanded attention. Death changed how people lived. They planned less, expected less. Tomorrow was uncertain. Promises were fragile. Injury was equally dangerous. Work was physical and constant. Farming tools were sharp. Animals were unpredictable. Falls from horses, accidents with axes. Pain was common. Recovery was uncertain. Disabled individuals relied heavily on family. Without support, survival was unlikely. There were no safety nets, no charity systems beyond the church. The elderly faced slow decline. Without modern care, age brought vulnerability. Cold worsened aches. Hunger weakened bones. Many elders did not reach advanced age. Mental suffering was rarely discussed. Grief was constant. Parents lost children. Children lost parents. People learned to endure quietly. Emotion was controlled. Religion shaped how death was understood. Death was not the end. It was a passage. Heaven or hell awaited. This belief brought comfort, but also fear. Last rites were important. Priests were called when death approached. Confession mattered. People wanted to leave the world forgiven. Fear of dying without confession was real. Sudden death was terrifying. It meant judgment without preparation. War increased death. Wounds from battle were rarely survivable. Infection followed injury. Survivors carried scars. Physical and emotional. Despite this, people continued. They married, had children, worked the land. Life did not stop for death. Acceptance became a survival skill. People did not dwell on loss. They adapted. They moved forward. Death shaped Scotland deeply. It hardened people. It shortened dreams. It made resilience necessary. In medieval Scotland, death was not hidden. It was part of daily life. Seen, felt, accepted. In medieval Scotland, life was hard for everyone, but for women, it was often harder. Their lives were shaped by duty, by silence, and by expectations they could not escape. From birth to death, a woman's path was rarely her own. Girls were taught early what their future would be. Marriage, children, work, education was rare. Few girls learned to read or write. Their knowledge came from watching others, from helping their mothers. From surviving. Woman's value was closely tied to marriage. Marriage was not about love. It was about survival. About alliances between families. About land, labor, and security. Girls were often married young, sometimes in their early teens. Choice was limited. Refusal was dangerous. Once married, a woman's life became controlled. Her husband made decisions. Where they lived, how they worked, how resources were used. Obedience was expected. Disobedience was punished. Domestic violence was common, rarely questioned. Husband's authority was rarely challenged. Women endured, quietly. Speaking out brought shame. Work never ended. Women cooked, cleaned, fetched water. They worked in fields, tended animals, spun wool, prepared food for winter. Pregnancy was constant. Birth control did not exist. Women spent much of their lives pregnant or recovering from childbirth. Each pregnancy carried risk. Each birth could be fatal. Childbirth took place at home, without trained medical help. Without clean conditions. Pain was expected. Death was accepted. If a woman died in childbirth, the family mourned briefly. Life continued. Another woman might be brought into the household. Widowhood was dangerous. Without a husband, a woman lost protection. Property rights were limited. Some widows were forced to remarry quickly. Others fell into poverty. Single women faced suspicion. Independence was rare. Women without male guardians were vulnerable to abuse. The church shaped women's roles. Women were seen as morally weaker, more sinful, more likely to fall. This belief justified control. Religious teachings praised obedience. Silence. Women were expected to suffer with patience. Punishment for women was harsh. Accusations of immorality could destroy a life. Public shaming. Isolation. Violence. Midwives held special roles. They assisted in births, knew herbs and remedies, but their knowledge also brought fear. Some were accused of witchcraft. Understanding became danger. Old age brought little relief. Elderly women depended on family. If none existed, they suffered alone. Despite this, women endured. They held families together. They preserved traditions. They raised children who would survive harsh conditions. Women formed quiet networks. They shared knowledge, helped one another, found strength in connection. Love existed, but it was fragile. Moments stolen between duties. Rare moments of comfort. Grief was constant. Children lost. Husbands killed in war. Homes destroyed. Women carried emotional weight. Yet their voices were rarely recorded. History remembered kings and warriors, not mothers, not daughters. Without women, society could not function. Yet they received little recognition. In medieval Scotland, a woman's life was defined by endurance, by quiet strength, by survival against all odds. In medieval Scotland, childhood was brief. There was no long period of safety, no protected time to grow slowly. From the moment a child could walk, life began shaping them, hard, unforgiving. Children were born into uncertainty. Many did not survive infancy. Illness, cold, hunger. Families learned not to grow too attached to. Early. Love was cautious. Loss was expected. Those who survived were quickly given responsibilities. Small hands carried water. Young feet followed animals. Children worked alongside adults. There was no concept of too young. By age 6 or 7, most children were contributing. Girls helped their mothers. Boys learned farming or herding. Play existed, but it was brief. Moments stolen between duties. Education was rare. Most children never learned to read. Knowledge was practical. How to plant, how to harvest, how to survive winter. Stories were lessons, warnings disguised as tales. Discipline was strict. Obedience mattered. Mistakes could mean hunger. Or danger. Parents were not cruel. They were afraid. Children saw death early. They watched siblings buried. Saw neighbors fall ill. Learned not to ask too many questions. War shaped childhood. Boys learned how to fight, not through training, but observation. Girls learned how to endure loss. Teenage years came early. By 12 or 13. Many children were treated as adults. Girls married young. Boys joined labor or conflict. There was little time to dream. Life demanded attention. Dreams were dangerous distractions. Orphans were common. War and disease took parents. Some children were taken in by relatives. Others were not. Life without family was harsh. The church offered some care. Monasteries sometimes took in children, but resources were limited. Help was not guaranteed. Punishment for children was severe. Beatings were accepted. Fear was seen as education. Despite this, children formed strong bonds with siblings, with animals, with the land itself. They learned resilience early, how to endure hunger, to hide fear. How to accept reality. Laughter existed. In small moments, shared jokes. Simple games. Human joy survived, but innocence faded quickly. By adulthood, many had already experienced loss, violence, and grief. Childhood shaped the future of Scotland. Hardened, resilient, prepared for hardship. In medieval Scotland, children did not grow up slowly. They grew up fast, because they had no choice. By the end of the medieval age, Scotland was a land shaped by endurance. Not by comfort, not by ease, but by survival. Every generation carried the weight of those who came before. Life in medieval Scotland was never gentle. The land was cold. The soil was stubborn. Winters were long. Hunger was familiar. Yet people remained. They adapted. They endured. Survival was not heroic. It was quiet. Waking before dawn. Working until darkness. Saving food. Repairing tools. Enduring pain. What kept people alive was not strength alone. It was community. Families depended on one another. Clans offered protection. Neighbors shared what little they had. When war destroyed homes, people rebuilt. When famine came, they rationed. When disease spread, they endured loss. Legacy was not written in books. It lived in memory. In stories told by FIRELIGHT. In warnings passed down. In lessons learned through suffering. The spirit of Scotland was forged through hardship. Pride was not loud. It was stubborn, refusing to surrender land, refusing to forget. English invasions threatened control, but they strengthened identity. Scots knew who they were by who they resisted. Clans carried names that lasted centuries. Feuds faded, but loyalty endured. Blood ties mattered. Honor mattered. Religion shaped understanding. Faith gave meaning to suffering. It promised justice beyond this life. It offered hope when reality offered none. Women carried the future. Raising children in harsh conditions, preserving culture, holding families together. Their contributions were silent, but essential. Children grew into resilience. They inherited strength, not comfort. Their childhoods prepared them for survival. Death was constant, but it did not erase life. People continued to love. To laugh. To hope. Medieval world passed. Castles fell. Borders shifted, but the spirit remained. Modern Scotland carries traces of this past. In traditions. In language. In memory. The land remembers. When we look back, we do not see weakness. We see endurance. People shaped by struggle. The legacy of medieval Scotland is not suffering alone. It is resilience. Identity. Survival against impossible odds. In the end, what defined medieval Scotland was not how harsh life was, but how people lived through it. This is the story they left behind. Not written in stone, but carried forward, generation after generation.